Most people don't realize how strong they are because life has never forced them to find out. They live just comfortable enough to avoid testing themselves, just distracted enough to ignore the quiet dissatisfaction inside. They wake up, go through their routines, and tell themselves that this is all there is. But somewhere deep down, there is a voice that knows they are capable of more. That voice grows louder when things start to fall apart, because struggle has a way of revealing what comfort keeps hidden. There comes a moment in everyone's life when the weight becomes too heavy. It might be a breakup, a failure, a betrayal, or a loss. It might be the slow realization that the life you are living is not the one you imagined for yourself. That moment is painful, but it is also honest. It strips away illusions and leaves you alone with who you really are. And in that moment, you either collapse or you discover a strength you didn't know you had. The Stoics believed that hardship is not an accident. It is training. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire of his time, wrote that what stands in the way becomes the way. He meant that obstacles are not things to avoid. They are things that shape you. Without difficulty, you never learn what you are made of. There was a woman named Elena who learned this the hard way. She had built her life around stability, a steady job, a long-term relationship, and a future that looked predictable and safe. She believed that if she did everything right, life would reward her. But life does not follow rules. One year, her relationship ended suddenly. The person she trusted most decided to walk away. At the same time, her company downsized, and she found herself without the career she had spent years building. In a matter of months, everything she thought defined her was gone. The future she had planned disappeared, and she was left standing in the ruins of what she used to call her life. She felt weak, lost, and terrified. But beneath that fear was something else, something quiet and stubborn that refused to give up. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said that circumstances do not make the man, they reveal him. Elena's circumstances had revealed how much of her identity had been built on things she could not control. Her job, her relationship, her plans for the future were all external. When they vanished, she felt like she had vanished too. But she was still there. And that meant something important. At first, Elena tried to escape the pain. She distracted herself, avoided thinking about what had happened, and waited for things to somehow return to normal. But normal was gone. The Stoics taught that suffering grows when you resist reality. The more Elena fought what had happened, the worse she felt. Eventually, she realized that the only way forward was through. She began to face her fear head-on. She asked herself who she was without her old life. What did she value? What kind of person did she want to become? These were not easy questions, but they were necessary. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should dig within yourself, because that is where the source of good lies. Elena started to do just that. She began rebuilding her life, not in dramatic leaps, but in small, deliberate steps. She took new classes, applied for new opportunities, and forced herself to stay open to change. Every day felt uncertain, but every day she also felt a little stronger. The more she pushed herself, the more she realized that the limits she had believed in were not real. The mind is a powerful thing. It tells you what you can and cannot do, often without any evidence. Elena had spent years believing she needed stability to survive. Now she was surviving without it. She had believed she was fragile, but she was still standing. The Stoics believed that you should not underestimate your ability to endure. They taught that humans are far more resilient than they imagine. There were days when Elena wanted to quit, days when the loneliness felt unbearable, and the future felt too uncertain. But every time she wanted to give up, she remembered that she had already survived her worst fears. Losing her relationship and her career had not destroyed her. It had forced her to grow. Seneca wrote that a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a person perfected without trials. Elena was being shaped by everything she had been through. She was learning how to trust herself, how to adapt, and how to keep going even when nothing felt secure. Slowly, she began to see herself differently. She was no longer just someone who had been hurt. She was someone who had endured. She was no longer defined by what she had lost. She was defined by what she was building. This is what the Stoics meant when they said that adversity is a teacher. It shows you that you are stronger than you think. It reveals a depth of character that only struggle can uncover. Elena had not become strong because life was easy. She had become strong because she refused to give up when it was hard. And that is the truth most people never discover. Strength is not something you are born with. It is something you earn through experience. It is built through every challenge you face and every fear you overcome. You may not feel strong right now. You may feel tired, discouraged, or uncertain. But that does not mean you are weak. It means you are being tested. And tests are what create strength. Elena was still at the beginning of her journey, but she no longer doubted herself the way she once had. She had seen what she could survive, and that changed everything. Elena began to notice something strange as the weeks passed. The fear that once felt overwhelming had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled her. It was still there, whispering doubts about her future, but it had lost its authority. This was something the Stoics had always understood. Fear does not vanish when circumstances improve. It weakens when you prove to yourself that you can act despite it. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to move forward anyway. Before everything fell apart, Elena had structured her life around avoiding discomfort. She chose the safe path, stayed in situations that felt familiar, and delayed difficult decisions because they were easier to ignore than to confront. But now, comfort was no longer an option. Life had forced her into uncertainty, and in doing so, it had forced her to grow. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should not hope for an easy life, but for the strength to endure a difficult one. Elena finally understood what that meant. Every day she woke up not knowing exactly how things would turn out. And yet, every day, she handled what came. That quiet, repeated act of facing the unknown began to reshape her sense of self. She was no longer someone who needed everything to be stable before she could function. She was becoming someone who could function in chaos. One of the most difficult challenges was learning to sit with her emotions. When her relationship ended, she had felt abandoned. When she lost her job, she had felt useless. These emotions were painful, but they were also temporary. The Stoics taught that emotions are natural, but being ruled by them is a choice. Elena began to observe her feelings instead of being consumed by them. When sadness came, she allowed it to pass. When anger rose, she acknowledged it without acting on it. This simple discipline gave her back control over her inner world. She started keeping a journal, not to complain, but to reflect. Each night, she wrote down what had challenged her and how she had responded. Slowly, she began to see patterns. She saw where she was growing stronger and where she still reacted from fear. This practice mirrored what Marcus Aurelius had done centuries ago. His meditations were not meant for anyone else. They were a way to hold himself accountable, to remind himself of the principles he wanted to live by. Elena realized that much of her suffering had come from trying to control what was never hers to control. She could not control whether someone loved her. She could not control whether a company kept her. She could not control the twists and turns of life. What she could control was her effort, her integrity, and her attitude. This distinction was liberating. Instead of feeling powerless, she felt focused. As she rebuilt her life, Elena also began to challenge the limits she had placed on herself. She applied for positions she once thought were beyond her reach. She introduced herself to people she would have been too shy to approach before. She took on projects that scared her. Every time she did something that once felt impossible, her confidence grew. Not because she was guaranteed to succeed, but because she was no longer afraid to try. Seneca wrote that we are more often frightened than hurt, and that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Elena saw this truth again and again. The things she feared, rejection, failure, embarrassment, were rarely as devastating as she had imagined. What was devastating was staying stuck in a life that no longer fit her. She began to feel a new kind of pride, not the loud, ego-driven kind, but the quiet pride that comes from knowing you are doing your best. Even on difficult days, she could look back and see that she had faced what needed to be faced. This gave her a sense of dignity that no external success could match. There were still moments when doubt crept in. Late at night, she would sometimes worry that she was too late, that she had wasted too much time, that she would never catch up. But the Stoics taught that regret is just another form of resistance to reality. The past is fixed. The only thing that matters is what you do now. Elena learned to bring herself back to the present, to the actions she could take in that moment. Slowly, her life began to change in ways she had not expected. New opportunities appeared, not because the world had suddenly become generous, but because she had become more open and capable. People were drawn to her calm confidence. She was no longer desperate for validation, and that made her more attractive in every sense. Most importantly, Elena began to trust herself. She knew that even if things went wrong again, she would find a way forward. That knowledge was a form of strength that no one could take from her. The Stoics believed that true power is not over others, but over yourself. Elena was learning this lesson day by day. She was becoming more disciplined, more resilient, and more grounded. She no longer needed life to be perfect in order to feel okay. This is what it means to be stronger than you think. It is not about never struggling. It is about discovering that you can survive and grow through struggle. Elena had not chosen her hardships, but she had chosen how to face them. And in doing so, she was becoming the kind of person who could handle whatever came next. As Elena continued rebuilding her life, she began to notice a quiet shift happening inside her. The panic that once controlled her reactions was slowly being replaced by steadiness. Problems still appeared, but they no longer felt like threats to her existence. They felt like things to be handled. The Stoics believed that the difference between a weak person and a strong one is not the size of their problems, but how they relate to them. Elena was learning to meet difficulty without falling apart. One of the greatest changes was how she handled loneliness. In the past, being alone had terrified her. Silence made her confront her thoughts, and her thoughts were often filled with fear. Now, she began to use solitude as a tool. She took long walks without music. She sat with herself in the evenings instead of numbing her mind. At first it was uncomfortable, but over time it became grounding. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should retire into yourself, because no place is more peaceful than the mind that is in harmony with itself. Elena was slowly building that inner peace. She also noticed that she was no longer as reactive. Small problems no longer sent her into emotional spirals. When someone was rude, she did not immediately take it personally. When something did not go as planned, she adjusted instead of complaining. This emotional discipline was something the Stoics valued deeply. Epictetus taught that no one can hurt you unless you allow them to. Elena realized how much power she had been giving away by letting other people's actions control her mood. This new steadiness began to show in her work as well. She became more focused, more consistent, and more willing to take responsibility. Instead of worrying about whether she was good enough, she focused on doing the work well. The more she did this, the more competent she became. And competence, she discovered, is the foundation of real confidence. There were still days when doubt appeared. There were still moments when she wondered if she was strong enough to keep going. But those doubts no longer defined her. She saw them for what they were, passing thoughts, not permanent truths. The Stoics believed that you should question your own mind, because it often lies. Elena had spent years believing every negative thought she had. Now she examined them instead of obeying them. One of the most important lessons she learned was that strength is built in moments no one sees. It is built when you keep going, even when no one is watching. It is built when you choose discipline over comfort. It is built when you face discomfort instead of running from it. Elena began to take pride in these small, quiet victories. She also began to understand that pain was not an enemy. It was information. It told her where she needed to grow. When something hurt, she asked herself why. When she felt triggered, she looked for the fear underneath. This self-awareness made her more emotionally intelligent and more resilient. Seneca wrote that a person who has faced hardship is harder to break. Elena had faced more in a year than she had in the decade before it. She had lost what she thought she needed to survive, and discovered that she could survive without it. That realization changed how she saw herself. She was no longer fragile. She was tested. As her inner world became calmer, her outer world began to reflect it. People responded differently to her. They saw someone who was grounded and capable. Opportunities appeared, not magically, but naturally, as a result of who she had become. Elena knew that her journey was far from over, but she also knew something else. No matter what happened, she would face it with strength, clarity, and courage. That knowledge gave her a sense of freedom she had never known before. She was no longer waiting for life to be easy. She was ready for it to be hard. By the time Elena reached this point in her journey, she no longer questioned her own strength. It was not because everything in her life had become perfect. It was because she had learned how to remain steady, even when things were imperfect. The Stoics believed that peace does not come from controlling the world, but from mastering yourself. Elena had done exactly that. Life continued to bring challenges. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when plans changed, when people disappointed her, when the future felt unclear. But none of it shook her the way it once had. She no longer interpreted difficulty as a sign that she was failing. She saw it as a sign that she was moving forward. Marcus Aurelius wrote that fire makes flames brighter and stronger. Elena had been in the fire, and instead of being destroyed, she had been refined. She had learned that resilience is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, persistent, and deeply rooted. She also realized something profound about other people. Many of them were still waiting to feel strong before they took action. Elena knew now that strength comes from action, not the other way around. You do not become confident, and then face your fears. You face your fears, and confidence follows. There were days when she looked back on her old life and felt grateful for what she had lost. Without those losses, she might never have discovered what she was capable of. Seneca wrote that sometimes adversity is a blessing in disguise because it forces us to see ourselves clearly. Elena was no longer afraid of change. She understood that nothing in life is guaranteed, and that this is not something to fear, but something to accept. When you accept impermanence, you stop clinging to what you cannot control and start focusing on what you can. Her strength was no longer based on circumstances. It was based on character. She was disciplined. She was resilient. She was honest with herself. These qualities gave her a sense of stability that no external success ever could. And that is the true message of Stoicism. You are stronger than you think, not because life will always be kind, but because you are capable of enduring and growing through whatever comes your way. Elena's story is not unique. It is a reflection of what is possible for anyone who is willing to face reality, take responsibility, and keep going. The strength you are looking for is already inside you. You just have to let it show.